It happened at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of quiet, ordinary afternoon that never warns you your life is about to shatter. Rachel Bennett was behind the pharmacy counter, explaining medication dosages to an elderly customer, when her phone buzzed. One glance at the screen and her stomach dropped. Withdrawal of $200,000 to $340,000 successfully processed. For a moment, her brain refused to understand. The number looked wrong, too many zeros. Too impossible. She blinked, checked again, and felt her pulse hammer in her ears. The customer kept talking, something about blood pressure pills, but his voice faded into static. The shelves blurred. The fluorescent lights above her head flickered like warning signs. Rachel's breath came shallow and fast, her hands trembling so violently that the pill bottle rattled in her grip. She excused herself, stumbled into the break room, and stared at the phone again. The balance read 0. 10 years of saving, 10 years of skipped vacations, no dinners out, no new clothes gone in one digital heartbeat. Her first thought wasn't even of herself. It was of her parents, Margaret and Charles Bennett, sitting in their perfect suburban home, drinking coffee from matching mugs, pretending to be the picture of decency. A cold, impossible thought crawled into her mind. They did it. Rachel's fingers shook as she opened the banking app, scrolling through the transaction details. The withdrawal was made in person at her local branch. Someone had used her ID, her signature. Her throat went dry. She didn't even remember grabbing her purse. One second she was in the pharmacy. The next, she was outside in the biting autumn air, the bus stop a blur of gray concrete. The 40-minute ride home stretched like a nightmare in slow motion. She refreshed her banking app over and over, praying it was a glitch. It wasn't. Every refresh ended the same way, a perfect, merciless $0. Zero staring back at her. Memories crowded in like ghosts, her mother demanding family contributions every month. Her father's voice calling her ungrateful when she kept a little extra for herself. Her sister Emily bragging about a new car she hadn't paid a cent for. 10 years. 10 years of living small so they could live large. When the bus finally hissed to a stop in front of the Bennett house, Rachel's legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She pushed open the familiar white door. Heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint. And there they were, Margaret and Charles, exactly as she had pictured. Her mother scrolling through her phone. Her father reading his newspaper. Calm. Ordinary. As if the world hadn't just ended. "Where's my money?" Rachel's voice cracked despite her effort to stay composed. Charles folded his newspaper with slow precision, the same way he used to when denying her something as a child. Then he looked up, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Thank you for your naivety." "Rachel," he said, "your money now guarantees Emily's future." Margaret finally looked up, eyes cold and satisfied. "A girl like you would have wasted it anyway." Rachel froze. The betrayal was total, complete. Then something inside her shifted. Her lips parted, and a strange sound escaped her. It wasn't a sob. It was a laugh. Low, shaking, and growing louder until both of them frowned. They thought she'd lost her mind. But Rachel Bennett wasn't breaking. She was remembering. And they had no idea what she'd been preparing for the last 3 years. Rachel stood in the doorway, still trembling, the laughter dying slowly in her throat. The house smelled of cinnamon and coffee, the scent of her childhood, now poisoned. Margaret placed her phone face down on the table, irritation flickering across her carefully made-up face. Charles rustled his newspaper, the deliberate kind of sound meant to remind her who held the authority here. "Sit down." "Rachel," Margaret said coolly. "You're being dramatic." Rachel didn't move. Her eyes drifted from her mother's diamond earrings to the framed family photos lining the wall, each picture edited history, pretending they had been happy. "You forged my signature," she said quietly. "You stole my life." Charles sighed, as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. "We did what we had to. Emily's med school tuition is due next week. Do you know what that costs?" You're part of this family. You should want to help." The word help landed like a slap. Rachel's voice trembled with disbelief. "Help? You emptied my account." Margaret's tone turned sharper. "Don't be so selfish. You've been working for years, but you don't even have a family of your own. That money would have just sat there while your sister becomes a doctor. Think of it as an investment in someone who will actually make something of herself." Rachel almost laughed again. The cruelty was so casual, so rehearsed. Every sentence was an echo from her childhood when she wanted a school trip, when she needed new shoes, when Emily needed more. Her pulse steadied. She began to look at them not as parents, but as strangers who had finally unmasked themselves. "You didn't just steal my savings," she whispered. "You stole every year I worked for it." Charles frowned, uneasy now. "Watch your tone. We're still your parents." That word parents snapped something in her. Parents protect? They don't forge IDs. Margaret leaned back, smiling coldly. "You think you're smarter than us, don't you? That job of yours, those little savings, it all came from the values we taught you." Rachel stared at her, a calmness settling where panic had been. "Maybe you did teach me something," she said softly. "How to wait, how to keep quiet, how to plan." The silence stretched. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Charles folded his paper again. A nervous tick now. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Rachel smiled faintly. "You'll find out soon enough." She turned and walked toward the staircase, each step deliberate, her voice drifting behind her like smoke. "Did you take the money from the right account?" The question hung in the air, heavy and strange, and for the first time, both of them looked afraid. Rachel's question sliced through the silence like glass. Margaret's eyes flicked toward Charles. Confused, but he only frowned, pretending to be unimpressed. "What kind of nonsense is that supposed to mean?" he asked, voice rising. Rachel didn't answer right away. She let the tension bloom, savoring it, feeling the balance of power shift in the room for the first time in her life. Her heart was pounding, but her face was unreadable. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying two strangers who'd wandered into her home. "I'm just wondering," she said softly, "if you're absolutely sure which account you took the money from." Charles stood, the newspaper dropping to the floor. "Don't play games. Rachel, you're not in a position to make threats. Who said I'm threatening?" Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I'm asking a question." Margaret rose, too, her confidence cracking. "What are you talking about?" Rachel smiled small, restrained, but sharp enough to draw blood. "You'll see soon enough." Then she turned and walked upstairs, leaving them frozen in the kitchen's fading light. The air seemed to hum with something they couldn't name fear. Maybe, or the realization that their daughter was no longer the quiet, obedient girl who handed over her paycheck. In her room, Rachel closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood. Her laughter came again. Softer this time, the laugh of someone who finally knew how the story would end. On her desk, her laptop screen glowed, filled with folders labeled Plan A, Bait account statements, bank video access. She opened one, scrolling through digital evidence that glittered like a loaded gun. Downstairs, Margaret and Charles argued in low, urgent tones. Upstairs, Rachel began to remember everything. 10 years earlier, Rachel Bennett was 20 and naive enough to believe that hard work would win her freedom. She'd just landed her first job at a small pharmacy, earning $800 a month. It wasn't much, but it was hers until her parents decided otherwise. Margaret called it the family contribution system. Charles said it was tradition. Every paycheck, Rachel had to hand over 80% of her earnings for the good of the household. They smiled as they took the envelopes from her hands, promising she was helping keep the family afloat. Back then, she wanted to believe them. She packed lunches, skipped nights out, and told herself it was temporary. Emily was still in high school, bright and spoiled. The the golden child with perfect grades and a new phone every year. Margaret bragged about her constantly to relatives. "Emily will make this family proud," she'd say, while Rachel washed dishes in silence. At first, Rachel's sacrifices felt noble, but soon, noble turned to numb. Her co-workers went to movies, bought second-hand cars, started saving for vacations. Rachel took the bus, counted change for coffee, and smiled through questions about why she never went anywhere. She started keeping a small notebook, tracking every cent, every month, every lie her parents told about money. On the nights she couldn't sleep, she calculated how long it would take to save enough to leave. The answer was always the same forever. When she turned 22, she found a second job weekend shifts at Romano's, a noisy Italian restaurant across town. She told her parents it was overtime at the pharmacy. The lie burned her tongue, but the secret account it fed kept her sane. Each month, $500 disappeared into a bank account her parents didn't know existed. She named it House Fund, but deep down, she knew it wasn't just about buying a house. It was proof she wasn't powerless. Her life became a rhythm of exhaustion, pharmacy by day, restaurant by night, bus rides and sore feet. She watched Margaret parade new jewelry at church, watched Emily post pictures from Cancun, and smiled like she didn't care. But she did. She cared so much it hardened her. By 25, Rachel earned a promotion assistant manager, $4,500 a month. Her parents congratulated her with champagne and immediately raised her family contribution to $3,600. That night, Rachel stared at her reflection in the mirror and whispered, "Never again." She'd learned what they really meant by family contribution, her labor for their comfort, her future for Emily's spotlight. So she stopped playing the role they wrote for her. She learned to hide her pay stubs, to reroute transfers, to smile while lying. Every act of obedience became camouflage, and as the years passed, Rachel Bennett became exactly what her parents feared most, someone who could survive without them. It happened on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, the kind that always looked peaceful from the outside. Rachel Bennett sat at the dining table, helping her mother organize a pile of tax documents. Margaret liked to pretend it was a bonding ritual. "You're so good with numbers." Dear, but Rachel knew the truth. Her mother loved control more than closeness. Rachel sorted through folders marked household expenses, Emily's tuition, and insurance, moving quickly until a manila envelope caught her eye. It wasn't labeled. She opened it, expecting receipts. Instead, she found her own name, Rachel Bennett, printed neatly across a stack of bank statements. Her breath caught. The papers showed accounts she hadn't touched in years, transactions she didn't remember making, credit lines she'd never applied for. At the bottom of the pile was a photocopy of her Social Security card and birth certificate. She froze. "Mom, why do you have these?" Margaret didn't look up. "You left them here years ago." "I just keep things organized." But Rachel knew she hadn't. She'd locked those documents away after college, the day she opened her first independent account. Now they were here, cataloged like possessions. Her pulse quickened. "Have you been checking my accounts?" Margaret's tone sharpened. "Of course. That's what parents do. Someone has to make sure you're not wasting your money." It wasn't just the invasion. It was the casual certainty, the absolute belief that her mother had every right. That night, Rachel sat in her car outside the pharmacy parking lot, the envelope clutched in her lap. Her mind raced through every transaction, every login, every small lie she thought had kept her safe. The walls she'd built over years suddenly felt paper thin. A few days later, Aunt Nora called. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Honey, I don't mean to pry, but your mom mentioned something at Bridge Club. She said your savings would finally pay off. Emily's med school isn't cheap. You know." Rachel's hand tightened around the phone. "What do you mean?" "My savings." "Well," Nora continued nervously, "they said you've been saving for years, and since Emily's tuition is due, It's, you know, all in the family." The words sank in like poison. Rachel felt the world tilt. She could have confronted them that night. She could have shouted, moved her money, walked away. But instead, a cold clarity filled her chest. If she ran, they'd spin the story, call her ungrateful, hysterical, disloyal. They'd still win. So she made a decision. She wouldn't run. She'd wait. She'd let their greed ripen until it devoured them whole. When she closed the envelope, her reflection in the car window looked different, colder, older, and finally awake. That was the night Rachel Bennett stopped being the obedient daughter, and the long game began. The plan began quietly, almost invisibly, in the dim light of Rachel Bennett's apartment. The night after she spoke to Aunt Nora, she sat at her desk with a notebook, a calculator, and a single sentence circling her mind. "If they think they own me, then I'll let them buy the illusion." She opened a new online bank account under her aunt's address, something impossible for her parents to trace. Then she began a careful transfer, not of all her money, but piece by piece, small sums that slipped beneath her parents' radar. Every week, she moved a little more into that hidden account. The rest, she left in her visible account at First National, the one Margaret had always supervised. But now, it was no longer her real savings. It was a stage. Rachel started studying how to manipulate numbers, learning the language of credit lines, short-term transfers, and balance illusions. She created the perfect mirage, a visible account that appeared rich, steady, and completely believable. Each month, the statements reflected deposits and withdrawals that mimicked the life of a disciplined saver. She smiled when she realized the number looked poetic, $1.8 million, the exact cost of Emily's medical dream. Her mother would see that figure and believe fate had rewarded the right daughter. The setup took nearly 3 years. Rachel lived quietly, worked longer hours, said yes to every extra shift, and never spent beyond necessity. Her co-workers thought she was obsessive. She let them. They didn't know every sleepless night was another step toward freedom. Sometimes she'd glance at family photos online, Margaret beaming beside Emily in a white coat at her pre-med ceremony, Charles holding a glass of wine in their backyard, and she'd feel nothing. No rage, no sadness, just patience. One evening, she received a call from her mother. Margaret's voice was honey-sweet. "You've been so responsible, dear. Maybe it's time we talk about investing. You shouldn't keep that much money just sitting there." Rachel almost laughed. The hook had taken the bait. She played along, feigning confusion, asking questions about interest rates and family legacy. Margaret, pleased by her compliance, promised they'd handle things together when the time came. When Rachel hung up, her hands were steady. The trap was ready, a bank account filled with borrowed numbers and false promises, a perfect reflection of the family that had built itself on illusions. She wrote one final line in her notebook. "Patience is a weapon. Greed pulls the trigger." Then she closed it and stored it in the back of her closet, right next to the folder labeled Evidence. Every time she walked past that closet, she felt the faint hum of anticipation, not guilt, not revenge, but inevitability. The Bennetts would take what they thought was hers, and she would take back everything they never gave. It was Rachel Bennett's 30th birthday, a day she had predicted down to the hour. She woke before sunrise, brewed her usual black coffee, and dressed for work like it was any other Tuesday. But as she slipped her phone into her bag, she paused, staring at the screen for a long moment. She knew what was coming. At 2:47 p.m., in the middle of explaining prescription dosages to a customer, the notification arrived. Withdrawal of $1,800,000 successfully processed. Rachel's pulse didn't race this time. Instead, a calm spread through her chest, steady and sharp. The game had finally begun. Her co-workers noticed her stillness, the faint smile that touched her lips before she excused herself and stepped outside. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that stung and cleared the mind. She walked to the bus stop, watching the sky shift from silver to gray. By the time she reached the Bennett house, she had rehearsed every word she would say. Through the window, she saw Margaret and Charles at the kitchen table, drinking coffee like royalty after a conquest. Their faces were relaxed, satisfied, the perfect picture of parents who believed they had won. Rachel stepped inside. Neither looked up. "Happy birthday," she said softly. Charles lowered his paper just enough to meet her eyes. "We were going to call you later." "I bet you were," Rachel replied. "How thoughtful." Margaret's tone was light, falsely sweet. "I hope you're not still upset about that account situation. We'll use the money wisely. Emily's final year isn't cheap, you know." Rachel laughed quietly at first, then louder, until her mother frowned. "What's so funny?" "Oh, nothing," Rachel said. "Just wondering how it feels to steal something that was never yours to begin with." Charles straightened, his calm cracking. "Watch your mouth." "No," Rachel said, stepping closer. "You should watch yours, because the words you're about to say are going to decide how fast the police show up." Margaret blinked, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "You just committed multiple felonies: identity theft, document forgery, and grand larceny. I filed the police report an hour ago. The bank has you on camera, and I have the footage." Margaret's hand flew to her chest. You're lying." "Am I?" Rachel tapped the screen, revealing the frozen image of her parents at the teller counter. Margaret signing papers with Rachel's name. The color drained from both their faces. "That account you emptied," Rachel continued, her voice cold and precise, "wasn't real. It was bait. Every transaction, every number fabricated. You didn't take my money. You took my trap." Charles's hands trembled. "Rachel, please, we can talk about this. You mean negotiate?" she asked. "Fine. You have until noon tomorrow to return every cent real money, not fake, or I hand everything to the district attorney." "I'm sure the country club will love that headline." Margaret's composure shattered. Tears streaked her mascara. "You can't do this to us. We're your parents." Rachel's voice softened, almost pitying. "You taught me to take responsibility for my choices. I guess I learned well." As she turned to leave, Emily walked in, car keys jingling, a bright new BMW gleaming in the driveway. "What's going on?" she asked. Confused, Rachel smiled at her sister. "Ask Mom and Dad. They just paid for your car with a felony." Emily's smile faded. "You're being dramatic again." Rachel's laughter echoed down the hallway, low and certain. "Maybe," she said. "But this time, I wrote the ending." She left them standing there, three faces pale with panic as the first siren wailed faintly in the distance, a promise that the story of the Bennetts was about to change forever. The next morning dawned pale and silent over the Bennett neighborhood. Rachel Bennett sat at her kitchen table, her coffee untouched, phone resting face up beside her. The digital clock read 11:42 a.m. She didn't need to check the time again. She knew they'd call. At 11:47, the phone finally buzzed. Charles's voice trembled through the receiver. "The money's back in your account," he whispered. "Every dollar. Just, please, don't do this." Rachel opened her laptop. The bank notification was there, 1.8 million transferred in full. She stared at the numbers, then closed the screen. "You didn't return my money." "Dad," she said quietly, "you paid your own." He tried to speak, but his voice cracked, words collapsing under the weight of shame. She hung up before he could finish. At 2:00 p.m., the knock came. Two detectives. Crisp uniforms, calm faces. Rachel Bennett, one asked. She nodded and stepped aside. Within minutes, the police cars rolled up the Bennett driveway, red and blue lights flashing against the white siding. Neighbors gathered on lawns as Margaret and Charles were led outside, handcuffed, heads bowed. Margaret tried to speak to Rachel, but her words vanished in the sirens. The same people who once admired their perfect life now whispered behind manicured hedges. Rachel watched from across the street, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. This wasn't victory, it was consequence. Emily stumbled out of the house in tears, still clutching the car keys Rachel had noticed the day before. "You ruined everything," she screamed. Rachel's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "No, Emily, they did." The BMW was towed away that evening, the dealership filing fraud claims. Margaret and Charles spent the night in holding. Then, weeks in courtrooms, their retirement fund drained by lawyers, their reputation dismantled headline by headline. The local newspaper printed the story Rachel had foreseen. Local couple arrested for stealing daughter's life savings. By the time the article reached the neighborhood, the Bennett's name, once whispered with envy, became a cautionary tale. And Rachel Bennett, the daughter they underestimated, disappeared quietly from the town they once ruled. 3 months later, Rachel Bennett woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against her new windows. The house was quiet, too quiet. But that was the point. No footsteps pacing the hallway, no voices telling her what she owed, no guilt disguised as love. Just silence, hers alone. She walked through the rooms slowly, fingertips grazing the walls she'd paid for in full. Every piece of furniture, every light, every inch of space carried her name. No debts, no conditions, freedom, distilled into something tangible. Her phone buzzed with unread messages, emails from relatives, distant cousins asking what really happened, a few pleading for reconciliation. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and transferred $1.8 million, the exact amount her parents had returned, into a new scholarship fund for students from low-income families. She called it the Bennett Trust. The irony wasn't lost on her. The donation confirmation appeared on screen, a single line of text that seemed to erase years of bitterness. She whispered to herself, "Money they stole from me won't buy my peace." Later, she walked outside, standing barefoot on the wet grass. The air smelled clean, new. Across the street, a for sale sign stood in front of her parents' foreclosed house, the windows dark, the garden overgrown. For a moment, she almost felt pity. Almost. But pity, she decided, was just another form of debt, and she'd finally paid every one of hers. Rachel turned back toward her own front door, closing it behind her with quiet finality. Freedom had cost her a family, but for the first time in her life, she could afford it. The evening sun poured through the kitchen window, painting the walls in gold. Rachel Bennett stood by the counter, tea in hand, watching the light fade. Her phone buzzed, one name flashing on the screen. Mom. For a long moment, she didn't move. The sound felt distant, like an echo from another life. She remembered the laughter, the manipulation, the years she mistook control for love. Then she took a slow breath and pressed block. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace, the kind she had built, paid for, and finally earned. Outside, the world carried on. Somewhere, her parents were counting losses, her sister learning humility. Rachel smiled faintly, the smallest trace of warmth in her eyes. "Freedom," she whispered, "isn't revenge, it's release." And as the sun disappeared, so did the last shadow of the Bennetts,